Ant-Man, the smallest Avenger. Ant-Man has two movies, one called just Ant-Man, and the other one Ant-Man and Wasp. Ant-Man has also appeared in Captain America: Civil War and in Avengers Endgame. In Avengers Endgame, the quantum realm was a very important aspect and focus point. This allowed the Avengers to time travel and fix everything from the snap from Thanos. Ant-Man, also known as Scott Lang, was not the first Ant-Man in the MCU, as the suit belonged to Hank Pym, who was Ant-Man in the 60s. Now, what if I said the MCU followed the comic line more closely? Ant-Man would be more of a popular superhero. Or was the decision that Kevin Feige made the better decision? Well, let's analyze this and find out. Ant-Man debuted in Tales to Astonish number 27, which was released in January 1962, but not as Scott Lang, but as Hank Pym. A year and a half later, Avengers number 1 came out, and Hank Pym was at the forefront, being one of the original Avengers, alongside the likes of Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, and Wasp. Now, if you fast forward to the MCU, Ant-Man was not in the MCU for years. But yes, Hank Pym was there, but the character Scott Lang debuted after the Age of Ultron follow-up Avengers movie. And this movie closed out Phase 2. I think this is important to mention that this movie took place after Age of Ultron. Why? Well, because traditionally Hank Pym is the one that actually creates Ultron, not Tony Stark. And if you look at Ultron, you can somewhat see that Ultron's face resembles an ant. Now, this is a massive departure from the MCU, as Hank Pym retires after his wife, Janet, shrinks so small and essentially just enters the quantum realm and gets stuck in the quantum realm. Janet is also one of the original Avengers in the comics, and who has been a very big character. Wasp in the comics was the main love interest to Hank Pym, but also an original Avenger, who also was in Ant-Man 2, played by Michelle Pfeiffer. But at one point in the comic, she was actually the leader of the Avengers, even dated Tony Stark for a while. Whereas Hope, who portrays Wasp in the MCU, is a very different character in the comic books. She's basically a villain who is outraged by the death of her parents and wants to seek revenge. So why did the MCU and Kevin Feige make the decision to not have Ultron be created by Hank Pym like in the comics? I believe this is simply because you already have so many geniuses within the actual Avengers, where you have Bruce Banner and Tony Stark. And I guess they felt three's a crowd. One thing we will never know is how would the Avengers and Ultron look if Edgar Wright's Ant-Man was made sooner. As originally the first draft for the script was done in 2008, which obviously was never made. However, according to the interview from Edgar Wright, maybe there wouldn't be much of a change, maybe just in tone. But as for the story, it still shows Hank Pym in the 60s and Scott Lang in modern time. This is what Edgar Wright had to say about the movie's proposed plot. You can see here, Hank Pym was still supposed to be in the movie. However, it was supposed to be in the 60s. And Scott Lang was supposed to be Ant-Man in the contemporary. Sort of flash forward is how he had got the suit. So basically, Hank Pym was never going to be a member of the original Avengers. Thus, Ultron would have likely never been created by Hank Pym within the MCU. But why Scott Lang? So, Scott Lang debuted in March 1979 in Avengers 181. Scott Lang is an ex-convict and electronics expert, hired by Stark International, which enables him to steal the Ant-Man suit from Hank Pym, who had no longer had the mantle and has also given up the name at this point. The reason why he wanted to steal it was to help his sick daughter. When Pym found out that that's why he was after the suit, he allowed Scott Lang to keep using the suit and become the second Ant-Man. So, why is Scott Lang at the forefront? I think if you break down the Avengers, you had a pair of spies, an archer, a genius with a split personality at that. You had a soldier, you had a witch, and then you had a
genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
Now you have Scott Lang, who is an ex-convict, but yet a family man, and more focused on the comedic side, especially with the casting of Paul Rudd. So, Scott Lang is different than everyone else I mentioned, and I believe this is the core reason why Scott Lang was chosen to be the main Ant-Man within the MCU over Hank Pym. Now let's talk about Yellow Jacket. Yellow Jacket is the main villain, and is Darren Cross, who is in the Ant-Man, the Yellow Jacket suit. Now, Darren Cross debuted in Marvel Comics in April of 1979, but wasn't Yellow Jacket. Actually, he wasn't Yellow Jacket until 2016 in the comics. That's right, a full year after the first Ant-Man movie came out. Basically, Darren Cross, as Yellow Jacket, was created for the movie. Yellow Jacket originally was none other than Hank Pym. In the story, best featured in Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Hero. I will admit I don't know the story in the comics too much, but in Earth's Mightiest Hero, after living with the guilt of creating Ultron and all the damage Ultron has done, he secludes himself, gets depression and anxiety, and he is doing some science stuff, and experiment goes wrong, causing basically a temporary split personality disorder. All the Avengers believe Hank Pym is dead, but actually Yellow Jacket is Hank Pym, who shows up basically as an anti-hero, taking matters into his own hand, but he's like crazy, kind of like a Joker to a small degree. Very similar powers to Wasp, with flying and stinging and every that. So, the story of Hank Pym in the comics and at least in Earth's Mightiest Hero, is a story about mental health and dealing with mental health, while Hank Pym in the MCU does deal with depression and mental health issues, but for totally different reasons, and that reason being due to the love of his life being gone in Janet, and then the broken relationship with his daughter. So this is quite the difference between the MCU and the comic books. I feel this might have been a missed opportunity with Ultron and Yellow Jacket and this Hank Pym becoming Yellow Jacket within the MCU. Maybe we'll see a Marvel What If on it or something, but definitely something I would love to see. So, why not do another Ant-Man villain? Well, actually, Ant-Man never had his own comic line, thus never having his own rogue gallery. And why is that? Well, this is a quote that Stan Lee said.
You introduced a story, The Man in the Anthill, then Ant-Man and the Wasp, then changed him into Giant Man, the new Giant Man, Goliath, Yellow Jacket, and the new Ant-Man. Was Ant-Man a struggle to...
Yes, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Ant-Man should have been as popular as any. And when they do the Ant-Man movie, I think it'll be very good. The reason it didn't work in comics, and this is the one place where I couldn't get the artists to do what I wanted. He was supposed to be that size. So they should have shown him, they should have drawn him next to a bottle, a water bottle. So you'd have seen the bottle like that, and you'd have seen the little figure of Ant-Man. it's special effects. They didn't put the special effects in. When they drew Ant-Man, they made him look normal size. And they would draw a figure of a man. And we had to imagine that he was only an inch tall or whatever he was. It was that I couldn't get the artist. My one failure, because I always think I'm a good explainer, I couldn't get the artist to realize they needed him to look very small. You know, put him next to a kitten and let the kitten look like a tiger and he's that small. That would be an interesting drawing. But just showing him looking life-size with the paw of the kitten, it didn't mean anything. Somehow they couldn't get the difference. And I think that's the reason the character didn't do well. Visually, the pictures were never that interesting.
And so basically, because there was no comic books, there was no villains, no rogue galleries. Now you might be wondering, well, what about Ghost, who's the main antagonist in Ant-Man and Wasp, the Ant-Man sequel? Actually, Ghost is very different in the comic books, and started out as an Iron Man villain, actually, and was just kind of moved into being an Ant-Man villain, basically because they had to come up with somebody. Now, as for Ant-Man 3, we don't know much about Ant-Man 3, but we do know the next Thanos-level enemy, or Avengers-level enemy, Kang the Conqueror, will be in this movie, perhaps the main antagonist in this movie, and maybe out of a necessity, because this does draw interest as here's the first movie with the main villain. And so basically all these reasons, Yellow Jacket being created, like having a new Yellow Jacket that's created for Ant-Man, having Ghost, having Kang in the movie, is basically out of a necessity, since Ant-Man didn't have his own comic book line. Now the overall question, did the MCU fall short on Ant-Man? Well, I think this answer varies. I think in some ways, not having Pym connected to Ultron, or not having Hank Pym struggle with mental health and become Yellow Jacket specifically, I think that might have been a missed opportunity. I think it would be really exciting to see that stuff. However, the Ant-Man movies stand out with a lot of humor and fun set pieces, such as like the Thomas the Tank Engine fight scenes and everything. And who doesn't love Paul Rudd? So I do think it's kind of a flip of the coin here. On some cases, yes, I think MCU did fall short. On other cases, no, I don't. And I think in Civil War, for example, Hank Pym was great and had a show-stealing performance there. Well, thanks for watching, everyone, and please remember to like and subscribe, and let me know if you would like to see more videos about this, about how the comic books in the MCU are change for necessity, and maybe not just MCU, but DC, or even other different types of TV shows that aren't mainline movies. Well, thanks for watching, and check you guys in the next video.